In the cradle of the sun-baked lands, where baobab trees whispered secrets to the sky and drums spoke louder than words, there was a kingdom called Baal. It was a place of gold and pride, with walls that stretched like the arms of giants and rooftops that caught the first kiss of dawn. In Baal, the markets were rivers of color and song, saffron, indigo, spices, laughter, and tales traded in equal measure. The people lived full, their feet light with dance and their spirits rooted deep in old ways. But behind the rhythm of joy, a silent truth curled like smoke. Everyone feared the king. King Zubri ruled with the iron calm of a blade before the strike. He did not shout, nor rage. But when he spoke, the earth seemed to lean in. Punishment came without warning. Mercy was a stranger. And yet, from the cold marble of his reign bloomed a single light, his daughter, Princess Nia. She was the soul of Baal. Graceful as a gazelle, wise beyond her years, and kind in a way that felt like rain after drought. The people adored her. When she walked among them, their worries fell like old leaves. Her laugh could quiet babies, and her gaze made even liars pause. She was her mother's joy, her father's mystery, and the people's pride. But as they praised their princess and whispered about their king, there was one they did not see at all. He sat at the edges of the market square, wrapped in tattered robes that had once been white. His beard grew wild, like vines trying to strangle the past, and his eyes, if anyone bothered to look, held the color of storm clouds before they broke. The children called him Ghost Man and threw stones for fun. The guards spat near his feet. The merchants ignored him as if he were part of the dust. He was just a beggar. A nobody. A speck in the kingdom's eye. They called him Old Madhu. No one knew where he came from. No one cared. He spoke to no one, save the wind and the ravens that sat near his shoulder. He mumbled strange songs when the moon was high, and some swore he never slept. He was the invisible soul of Baal, the one everyone saw, but no one looked at. But one day, the princess vanished. And the only person who knew why, was the beggar. Baal, for all its splendor, was not just a kingdom, it was a living heart. It pulsed with rhythm, with spirit, with old ways that even the king dared not defy. At the palace center stood the tree of calling, sacred and ancient. Its roots were said to stretch to the bones of the ancestors. There, the king made his declarations. There, sacrifices were made. And there, under the silver blossoms that never withered, Princess Nia had been blessed at birth. The palace itself stood like a lion, gold-roofed, ivory-walled, and fiercely guarded. Servants moved like whispers, and the Queen Ebony, floated through its halls like moonlight. She was the soft Zubri sharp, and she loved her daughter more than breath. Outside the palace walls, life bloomed. Dancers spun in the square. Griots sang songs that stitched history into memory. Drummers called the gods down in rhythm, and mothers sold fruits sweet enough to make a man forget his sins. But not far from that joy, old Madhu sat in silence. Each day, he'd settle beneath the shade of the market fig tree, a carved staff by his side, and a bowl before him that rarely filled. His eyes followed people, not with hunger or hope, but with knowing. Like someone who had already seen the endings. Children threw pebbles. Guards told him to move. But he never rose unless it rained. And then one day, a whisper began. It started with the hunters. The ones who brought back wild meat and stories. They spoke of strange lights in the forest of whispers, flickering like fire, but cold. Of songs that came with no mouth. Of trees that moved when no wind blew. The kind of stories drunk men told, yes, but these hunters were sober. Then came the shepherds. Their goats returned wide-eyed and restless. Then the birds, flocks flying in odd spirals above the forest canopy, disappearing without trace. The village elders began to talk low. Something old was stirring. Something that didn't want to stay forgotten. And still, Madhu sat. Still, he listened. Still, no one asked. Except Nia. She had noticed him, long before the whispers began. While others mocked, she had paused. In secret, she had begun to leave small offerings, bread still warm, dried fish wrapped in cloth, figs she had picked herself. At first, she left them in silence. Then, one day, she sat beside him. "You know the forest, don't you?" she asked. Madhu turned his face toward her slowly, eyes blinking like someone waking from a long dream. "I was born in it," he said. She tilted her head. "Is it true? What they say?" He didn't answer immediately. His hand rose, pointing to the sky. "When the wind changes its voice, the old ones stir," he said. "The forest remembers. Even if we do not." From that day forward, Nia visited him often. She wore a veil to hide her face from curious eyes, but even if she hadn't, none would believe a princess sat beside a beggar, listening like a student. He told her of things no book held, how the roots of Mbale ran deeper than its walls. How the sacred tree once whispered names before they were born. How the spirits of the land had once walked among the living, until humans grew deaf with pride. One day, as she offered him roasted plantain, he looked at her, eyes sharp like flint. "It is coming," he said. "What is?" "The silence that eats," Madhu whispered. "Something ancient is waking. And it does not wake gently." Nia frowned. "Can it be stopped?" "Not stopped," he said. "But maybe, delayed." She wanted to ask more, but the market bell rang, and duty called her back to the palace. Behind her, Madhu leaned into the tree, closed his eyes, and listened. Not to the people. Not to the noise. To the wind. And what it carried. The moon hung heavy in the sky that night, round, red, and watching. It was the eclipse of shadows, a rare celestial event said to thin the veil between the worlds of the living and the old ones. In the royal chambers, the air was still. Too still. Even the torches burned low, their flames flickering with hesitation. Princess Nia had gone to bed hours earlier. Her maids swore they had tucked her in, drawn the curtains, and lit the sacred incense. All was quiet. All was normal. Until it wasn't. When the maid returned with warm water and morning herbs, the room was empty. The sheets lay undisturbed. The incense had gone cold. And the air smelled like ash. Within moments, the palace thundered with footsteps and panic. Guards raced through halls. Servants were yanked from sleep and dragged into questioning. The queen cried out for her daughter. The king stood at the window, knuckles white on the marble sill, eyes locked on the red moon that had begun to fade. When the captain of the guard confirmed that the princess was not within the palace grounds, not in the secret gardens, not in the tunnels beneath, King Zubri's voice cracked like a whip. "Rebels," he growled. "It's an act of war." He ordered arrests, demanded confessions from villages known to hold grudges. By sunrise, 12 men had been shackled. By midday, 6 were gone. The queen collapsed, her wails echoing down the palace walls. But far from the shouting, the steel, and the sorrow, old Madhu sat beneath his fig tree. He did not cry out. He did not ask questions. He simply closed his eyes and whispered. "It has begun." The kingdom of Mbale moved like a beast in pain. The king unleashed his wrath across the land. Rivers were dragged by nets thick enough to catch whales. Forests were set ablaze, their leaves turning to ash beneath boots and blades. The air filled with the smoke of desperation. Every merchant caravan was stopped. Every traveler questioned. From the deserts in the north to the swamps in the south, every eye searched for a sign of Nia. The king announced a reward so rich it could feed entire villages for a year, gold, land, titles, all promised to whoever returned his daughter. But no one came. No ransom note appeared. No trace of her dress. No screams in the night. Just silence. In the heart of Mbale, the people gathered each morning to await news, to pray, to weep. And every morning, old Madhu sat on the same stone, carved staff across his knees, unmoved by the chaos. Until one day, as a small crowd formed around the palace gates, Madhu rose. His voice was cracked but clear, carrying strangely well across the open air. She is in the forest of whispers, he said. Taken by the night spirits. The people turned. Some scoffed. Others frowned. What nonsense is this? One man barked. Madhu didn't blink. I've walked that forest. Lived in it. There are paths you cannot see unless your heart knows fear. And there are spirits who feed on blood and names. They laughed. But Madhu kept speaking. There is a hunger waking in those woods. One that sleeps for 100 years and wakes for only one thing, royal blood. The princess is not gone. She is bound. They called him mad. Some threw fruit. A guard cuffed him for daring to incite panic. But the old man did not flinch. That night, beneath a cracked piece of sky, Madhu sat alone and remembered. Once, many years ago, long before his beard turned white and his back bent low, he had walked among the forest people, keepers of the old ways, guardians of the balance. They lived where no map reached, where trees moved and shadows whispered truths. He had learned their language. He had danced with the winds. He had even touched the roots of the sacred tree where ancestors dreamed. But when the forest demanded a price, when the spirits stirred and sought a vessel of royal blood, Madhu had refused. You were one of us, their leader had said, eyes glowing like moonlight on obsidian. Now, you are nothing. They stripped him of his name, his power, and his home. Cast out for choosing mercy over magic. And now, the forest was stirring again. The same hunger. The same curse. But no one wanted to listen. The next day, Madhu stood in the market and spoke again. The princess lives. But she is not where your horses or swords can reach her. She is behind the veil. This time, the crowd didn't laugh. They jeered. A boy threw a stone that struck Madhu's shoulder. A woman screamed that he was cursing the land. A drunk man spat on his robes. Still, he did not run. He limped through the village, bleeding slightly, staff tapping the ground like a slow drumbeat. Toward the edge of the kingdom. Toward the forest. He stood at the edge of the trees, closed his eyes, and spoke, not to people, but to the wind. And this time, the wind answered. In the palace, Queen Abani tossed and turned in her sleep. Her dreams had become a storm, visions of her daughter walking barefoot through fire, a man with silver eyes holding her hand, a forest that breathed like a beast. She woke in a sweat, heart pounding, and whispered one name. Madhu. She remembered him. The beggar her daughter used to speak of. The one who always seemed to know things before they happened. At dawn, she wrapped herself in the cloak of a merchant's wife and left the palace gates with only one guard, sworn to secrecy under pain of death. She walked the dusty roads with trembling hands and a mother's heart. She found Madhu seated beneath the tree again, eyes closed, lips moving with some forgotten prayer. She approached carefully. You know where she is, she said. He opened his eyes and looked at her, not with awe, not with fear, but recognition. I saw her, she whispered. In my dreams. You were with her. Madhu nodded slowly. She is alive, he said. But not for long. The queen dropped to her knees. Take me to her. He studied her, as if weighing her soul. Once we enter, he said, your crown means nothing. Are you ready to be only a mother? She did not hesitate. Yes. That night, as the moon returned to silver, the queen left no trace of her exit. Madhu walked beside her, slow but steady, his staff carving patterns in the dirt that seemed to shimmer and vanish behind them. They walked until the sky forgot its stars, until the air thickened like syrup, until even the crickets went silent. The edge of the forest loomed before them. The forest of whispers. It stood like a wall of shadow and green, ancient and alert. Trees taller than palaces. Vines like sleeping serpents. The entrance was not a path, but a feeling, like stepping into a memory you didn't know you had. Madhu turned to her, voice quiet. Once we cross, we do not turn back. Speak no lies. Make no promises. And if the trees ask your name, do not answer. The queen nodded, fear battling purpose in her chest. And then they stepped forward. Into the mist. Into the forest. And behind them, the wind erased their footprints, as if they had never been there at all. The forest breathed around them. It was not just a collection of trees, it was alive in a way that made the queen's skin prickle. Leaves shimmered even without wind. Roots curled and uncurled like sleeping animals. The air smelled of wet earth and old smoke, of forgotten names and silent promises. The trees whispered. Not in words, but in sounds, cracking bark, rustling leaves, sighs that echoed too long. The queen gasped as one tree opened its eye. A real eye, dark, wooden, blinking slowly. It looked at her, then closed again as if satisfied. Glowing stones floated just above the ground, pulsing with a heartbeat not her own. Ghostly figures passed in the distance, tall, cloaked, their faces obscured by veils of wind. Some stared at her. Others ignored her completely. All were watching. Madhu moved with ease, staff tapping the earth in a rhythm that felt ceremonial. Every few steps, he muttered words in a language the queen had never heard, rough, raw syllables that seemed to melt into the soil. A stone rolled from their path. A low-hanging branch lifted itself just out of reach. The forest listened to him. But not kindly. As they walked deeper, the queen began to see flickers, images in the trees, rippling like heat on stone. Nia, laughing beneath the palace fig tree. Nia, running through fields of yellow flowers. Nia, screaming, her face distorted, reaching out as something dark dragged her backward. No, the queen whispered, clutching her chest. Do not trust what you see, Madhu warned. This forest remembers everything, even your worst fears. Suddenly, the path changed. They arrived at a river that glowed with blue fire. It flowed without sound, perfectly still, yet rushing beneath the surface like a silent scream. Madhu did not speak. He simply pointed. The queen stepped forward, and was pulled inward, not by water, but by memory. She was in the palace again. Young. Beautiful. Holding her infant daughter. But instead of smiling, she handed the child to a wet nurse and walked away. Then another vision, Nia at 6, tears in her eyes as her mother scolded her for asking too many questions. Another, Nia trying to show her a drawing, ignored as the queen discussed court politics. No, the queen gasped. I did my best. I was doing what I had to. The river rose. Her reflection stared back with disappointment. Then a voice, her voice, echoed, you chose the throne over her heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her legs buckled. But she did not run. She stood there, chest heaving, and whispered, I was wrong. The river glowed brighter, then calmed. The fire blue parted. The path ahead appeared. You passed, Madhu said gently. The river only lets truth walk forward. Next came a tree wider than a house, its bark blackened and mirrored like glass. The mirror tree. Madhu stepped forward, and the queen watched in silence as the reflection changed. It showed him, young, strong, eyes wild with curiosity. Laughing with the forest people, dancing in fire circles, chanting with the shamans. Then the betrayal. The refusal. The exile. He watched as his younger self was stripped of his robes, pushed to the edge of the forest, cursed by the ones he once called family. Madhu dropped his staff. The mirror whispered, you ran. You let others suffer. You let him rise. I know, Madhu whispered, tears catching in his beard. I know. The tree pulsed once, and cracked, revealing a dark tunnel. Only one trial remained. At the tunnel's end stood a gate made of fire, not burning, but made of flame itself. The flame gate. A voice spoke from within the blaze, to pass, you must give a memory you love. Forever. The queen hesitated. My daughter's birth, she said. Take it. The flame flickered. Too easy. Then Madhu stepped forward. He closed his eyes. I give the night I chose mercy over magic, he said. The flame roared. Accepted. And opened. On the other side of the gate, the forest fell into unnatural silence. Not quiet, absence. As if sound itself had been swallowed. There, at the heart of a glowing grove, was Nia. She floated a few inches above the earth, wrapped in vines like veins of silver. Her eyes were closed, her skin glowing faintly. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Surrounding her were masked spirits. Tall. Faceless. Radiating power. And behind them stood the largest figure of all, twice the size of a man, with a crown of antlers and a face that flickered between man and beast. The Forest King. His voice was not a voice, but a rumble through the earth. She is almost ready, it said. Her body holds the light we need. Her blood carries the memory of royalty. She will be a perfect vessel. The queen stepped forward, fury rising. She is not yours. The spirits hissed. The king smiled. Madhu raised his staff. Take me instead, he said. This is my debt. I was meant to be your vessel. I ran. The Forest King laughed. You are already half spirit, old one. You cannot hold me now. You are the shadow of what you were. Then, from within the vines, Nia stirred. Her voice was soft, but certain. No. The forest shivered. She opened her eyes. I choose. The Forest King paused. What? I choose myself, Nia said, stepping forward, the vines melting away from her skin. I will not be a vessel. I will not be a cage. The spirits moved as if to seize her. But Madhu stepped between them, staff raised. His voice cracked with power, an old tongue, older than the roots of the world. Forbidden words that twisted the air, made the spirits scream. Nia! Run, he shouted. She didn't. Instead, she reached for him. And in that moment, the Forest King lunged. Madhu grabbed her hand, and with his last breath, spoke the final word. The forest erupted in light. A blast of white fire rolled out like a tidal wave, cleansing, burning, screaming. Trees bent backwards. Spirits howled and vanished. The ground split, and for a moment, the entire forest seemed to become sky. Then, silence. Smoke rose. Leaves fell like ashes. And in the center of the grove, Nia knelt alone. Her hand reached out to where Madhu had stood. Nothing remained. Only his staff, smoldering, glowing faintly with the last of his spirit. She wept. Not like a child. Not like a princess. But like someone who had just lost a piece of their soul. The forest, now still, listened quietly. And somewhere, on the wind, a voice whispered. I kept my promise. They found her at dawn. The mists still clung to the forest floor like silver snakes, winding between the trees. Birds had not yet begun their morning songs. The world was quiet, as if holding its breath. And there, at the very edge of the great woods, stood Princess Nia. Her dress, once stitched with silk and gold, now hung in tatters. Mud crusted her hem. Her hair was tangled, full of leaves and ash. Her feet were bare and bruised. But none of these things struck the queen, who had gone ahead of the guards to search on her own. No, it was the look in Nia's eyes that stole her breath. Eyes wide open, unblinking. Not with fear, nor shock, nor madness. But with knowing. The queen rushed forward, tears already slipping from her eyes. She wrapped her cloak around the girl, shielding her from the morning chill, from the stares of the guards who had finally caught up. Nia said nothing. She did not cry. She did not smile. She merely leaned into her mother's embrace like a child waking from a long and terrible dream. They rode back in silence. When they reached the city gates, the bells rang furiously. Servants cried out. Priests dropped to their knees. The king himself ran from the palace barefoot, his royal robes flying behind him like wings. He wept. He kissed her hands, her cheeks, her forehead. He called her miracle and light and his heart come home. He ordered the feast of the century and commanded that every citizen be given bread and wine that very evening. He never asked what happened. And Nia never told. She walked the halls of the palace like a ghost of herself, quiet, still, watching shadows that no one else could see. The queen tried to speak to her at night, brushing her hair the way she did when Nia was small. But the girl's mind seemed to wander, toward the forest, toward something left behind. The staff she carried, Madhu's staff, never left her side. She wrapped it in red silk and placed it beside her bed each night like a sacred relic. And though the king rejoiced and the people celebrated, Nia never truly returned. In the years that followed Princess Nia's return, the kingdom of Mbale changed. At first, the changes were subtle. Small ripples in the still waters of tradition. Nia spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of thunder. And slowly, the elders began to listen. The king's health declined. Whether it was the toll of the sleepless nights during her disappearance or the guilt of what he had ignored for so long, no one could say. But he grew quieter. Sadder. He began to look at the forest from his window with a distant fear in his eyes. When he passed, the mourning was deep and sincere, but it was Princess Nia, now Queen Nia, who stood with strength. She wore a crown woven with branches and gold, and behind her throne, she placed a single carving of the forest, twisted roots, rising trees, and a face that only the old might recognize. Her first decree was simple: no one shall mock the beggar. The court gasped. Some laughed, thinking it poetic, symbolic at best. But Nia's voice cut through the room like lightning. To mock the beggar is to mock wisdom itself. The laughter stopped. She ordered the guards to distribute cloaks and warm bread in the marketplaces. Public kitchens opened where servants and royalty alike could be found, helping those in need. The great cathedral steps, once swept clean for dignitaries, now welcomed the homeless and the weary. In the central square, a new tradition began. A simple wooden bowl, placed on a carved pedestal, stood open every day. People dropped in coins, food, letters, anything for those who carry wisdom in silence. And they came. Wanderers. Seers. Dreamers. The ones once chased away now found shelter. But Nia's reforms were not only of flesh and bread, they were spiritual. She walked to the forest once every season, alone, barefoot, and without guards. At its edge, she built a shrine with her own hands, nothing grand, just stone and ivy, and a flat surface where people left flowers, feathers, and bits of carved wood. The inscription read, "To the ones who guard us, though we never see them." The priests protested. They whispered that she was inviting old spirits back into the realm. But Nia only smiled and said, "They never left." At the palace gates, where once the beggars were driven away with kicks and curses, she had a statue erected. It was not of herself, nor of her father. It was old Madhu. His figure was not grand, not polished. He stood as he had lived, cloak tattered, eyes gentle, one hand stretched out as if in offering, or perhaps in teaching. Children placed flowers there daily. Travelers knelt before it and whispered prayers not taught by the temple. And beneath the statue, carved in a circle of wood and stone, wisdom wears torn robes. Foreign dignitaries visited, confused. "Who is this man?" they asked. "A beggar," Nia would say. "A prophet. A friend." As years passed, Nia ruled with grace and steel. She never remarried, never sought glory. She listened more than she spoke. Her court grew quiet and thoughtful, like a forest at dusk. And though she rarely smiled, her people came to say that when the wind blew just right, and the trees rustled near the palace, her eyes softened. As if she heard a song only she remembered. A song sung by someone long gone. But never forgotten. They say time washes away all things, grief, legend, even memory. But in Mbale, the whisper of a beggar still lingers. It began with the children. One by one, in villages far from the palace walls, they spoke of dreams. Vivid, strange dreams, of a man with a crooked back and eyes like deep water. He would appear when they were lost in the woods, or crying alone after scoldings, or when the world simply felt too big. He never spoke his name. Sometimes he told stories. Other times, he sang, in a language none of them had heard but somehow understood. A song about trees that remembered, rivers that forgave, and hearts that healed. And when they woke, they remembered every word, even as the melodies slipped away like smoke. Parents dismissed it as fantasy. Until one day, a boy wandered too deep into the western forest. Search parties were sent. The queen herself ordered the hounds. Yet on the third day, the boy walked out alone, unharmed, carrying a carved wooden fox in his hand. He said, "An old man fed me berries." He said, "My mother missed me." No one ever found the man. Then came the stories from the travelers. Merchant caravans crossing Bale's borders began leaving small offerings at the forest's edge, coins, fruit, scraps of cloth. They didn't know why. They only said it felt right. One night, a merchant woman camped near the woods awoke to the sound of humming. When she looked out, she saw him, thin, hunched, feeding foxes from his palm. His robes fluttered as if in wind, though the night was still. He turned to her, smiled, and vanished before she could speak. Word spread, like wind through reeds. Soon, it was custom for people to leave tokens by the great tree near Bale's shrine, tiny carvings, notes tied with red string, whispers carried in prayer. Messages like, "Thank you. Watch over her. I remember." No one collected them. But they never stayed long. Each morning, the offerings would be gone. Lifted by the wind, some said. Others claimed they were taken by the forest spirits, or perhaps, just one. The people began calling him the Beggar King. But not for his power. For his kindness. No palace. No crown. Just a crooked staff, 1,000 stories, and a heart that had once sacrificed everything for a child no one thought would remember. And yet, she remembered. Queen Nia often visited the statue. Not as a queen. Not even as Nia. But as a girl. She would sit beside the stone feet, lay her hand on the cool forest-carved surface, and close her eyes. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd speak aloud. "Are you still out there?" No one ever answered. But sometimes, the wind shifted. And somewhere, far off in the trees, a voice hummed a song only she knew. And so, we returned to where it all began. To the crackling fire, the beating drums, and the voice of the old storyteller sitting beneath the stars. His eyes gleam like the night sky itself, full of secrets and shadows. His voice, weathered yet warm, carries through the hush of the crowd like the wind through the trees. He leans forward now, his hands outstretched as if holding something sacred, something fragile. "You see," he says, "every kingdom has its warriors, its kings, its treasures and banners. But not all kingdoms remember the ones who walk unseen, who speak only when the world forgets how to listen." He smiles, slow and knowing. They mocked him. Laughed at his rags. Turned away from his voice. But when the time came, when even the crown could not command the spirits or save the child of gold, it was the beggar who heard the forest call. The fire flares. Sparks dance into the air like memories returning home. Princesses vanish, kings grow old, kingdoms fall and rise again. But stories. He taps his chest with a weathered finger, stories live here. And they remind us. The drums grow softer now, like a heartbeat slowing. So next time you walk the streets of your town, and you see someone bent by the ears, or dressed in cloth not fit for a feast, pause. A child leans forward. Why? The storyteller grins, his eyes crinkling. Because you never know if that person once walked through fire to bring someone home. You never know if that beggar has danced with spirits, or traded his soul for a child's laughter. He glances toward the trees beyond the village. For a moment, the fire dims. And who knows? He whispers, perhaps one day, the world will tremble again. The winds will shift. Shadows will stir. And when they do, it won't be a king who stands between us and the darkness. The fire roars one last time. It will be someone we forgot. Someone who walks without glory, without praise. Someone like you. Or me. Or the man feeding foxes near the forest line. Silence. Then the beat returns, slow, steady, eternal. And that, he says, leaning back into the shadows, is why you must never ignore the ones no one sees. For the soul that saves the world often wears torn robes, and walks softly through the dust. The flames flicker low. Children huddle closer. The sky deepens into midnight. And just before the drums fall silent, a soft voice rises from the edge of the woods. Humming. A tune only heard by those who still believe. Fade out. They found her at dawn. The mists curled low over the ground like ghostly hands, and the birds had not yet begun their morning songs. A strange silence held the edge of the forest of whispers, as if the world itself was unsure whether to breathe. And there, just beyond the roots of an ancient baobab, stood Princess Nia. Alone. Her gown, once woven of royal silk and threaded with gold, hung in tatters. Her hair, usually combed with oils and beads, was wild, twisted with ash, leaves, and dirt. Her feet were bare, bruised from the forest floor. But it was not the dishevelment that struck her mother, who had reached her first. It was the stillness in her eyes. Nia stood as one not lost, but changed. The queen, heart trembling, ran forward and wrapped the girl in her cloak. For a moment, Nia did not respond. And then, slowly, her arms returned the embrace. No words. No tears. Just two souls holding on in the cold morning light. They returned to the city in silence. The king wept when he saw her. He shouted for healers, priests, music, feasts. He kissed her hands and called her a miracle. But Nia said nothing. She moved through the palace like a shadow, quiet, watching. Her eyes followed movements no one else noticed. Her fingers sometimes reached for something that wasn't there. And always, she kept near her the gnarled wooden staff wrapped in red silk. Old Madu's staff. The people rejoiced. Bells rang. Markets gave out free bread. 100 dancers were summoned to perform under the full moon. But deep down, everyone knew something had shifted. And Nia was never the same. In the weeks that followed, the king's health faded. Perhaps it was grief, or guilt, or the wear of an old heart burdened with secrets. When he passed, there was mourning across the land, but there was also trust. The people looked to Nia not with doubt, but with a quiet reverence. She wore no heavy crown at her coronation. Just a circle of vines and bronze. Her throne was moved to face the east, toward the forest. Her first decree silenced the kingdom. No one shall mock the beggar again. Gasps echoed through the court. Some smiled, thinking it symbolic. Others scoffed. But Nia stood, her voice calm and firm. To mock the beggar is to mock wisdom itself. From that day on, no one dared. She changed more than laws. Where the royal kitchens once fed only the elite, now fires burned daily to bake bread for the poor. Temples opened their doors to the cold. Shrines were built not only for gods of gold, but for spirits of the land, the silent ones who watched and whispered. At the gates of the palace, she ordered a statue. Not of herself. Not of her father. But of old Madu. He stood in stone, bent and barefoot, a simple staff in hand, one arm outstretched, not in plea, but in offering. Beneath his feet, carved in old Baal script. Wisdom wears torn robes. Children left flowers there every morning. The statue's hand was often dusted with chalk, or bits of sugarcane, or small painted rocks. No one told them to do it. They just knew. In every season, Queen Nia walked to the forest. Alone. She knelt at its edge, where roots crisscrossed like veins, and placed her palm to the soil. No guards. No ceremony. Just a silent offering. The old priests whispered that she was inviting the spirits to rise again. That she honored something too wild, too old, But she only smiled and said, they were never gone. As time passed, stories spread. Not from the palace, but from beyond. Children began to speak of dreams, vivid, strange dreams. A man would appear when they felt most afraid or alone. He wore tattered robes and carried a crooked staff. He hummed songs they couldn't name but never forgot. He told them stories that made their hearts feel full, even when they cried. One girl, after being lost in the market for a whole day, returned home with a carved fox in her hand and said, "A kind man gave it to me. He said you were worried, Mama." Some thought it imagination. Until a boy disappeared into the forest and came back 3 days later. Safe. Unharmed. Carrying a red feather and a handful of berries. "The beggar gave me food," he said. "He said to go home now." No one ever found the man. Travelers passing Bale began leaving tiny offerings by the trees, coins, bits of cloth, crumbs of bread. They didn't know why. It just felt right. Some claimed they'd seen him, an old man with a gentle face, feeding foxes from his hand. He never spoke. Just smiled and vanished like mist. They called him the Beggar King. Not for gold or thrones, but for the kingdom he protected when no one else could. The one made of stories, and roots, and sacrifice. Nia, now older, her braids streaked with silver, often sat by Madhu's statue at dusk. Alone. Unseen by the crowd. She'd place her hand on the worn stone, eyes closed. "Are you still out there?" she would whisper. There was never an answer. But sometimes, the wind changed. And for just a moment, it carried a tune. A hum, soft as the rustling of leaves. A melody only she knew. And now, as the storyteller finishes the tale, his voice softens. He leans forward, the fire dancing in his eyes. "So you see," he says, "we honor kings and praise heroes. But never forget the ones who are invisible. The ones we push aside. Because when the darkness rises, it may not be a warrior who stands in the way." A child gasps. It may be a beggar. The drums fall silent. The fire dims. And next time you see someone in rags, someone bent and broken, walking alone, remember. He closes his eyes. It might be someone who walked through fire to bring the light back. Behind him, the trees stir in the night wind. And somewhere, faint and fading, a voice hums an old song. As the forest watches. And remembers.